Welcome everyone. This is another live event of Jeune Europe. For those of you who don't know Jeune Europe, let me make a brief introduction. So Jeune Europe is a platform of young individuals that foster ideas and discussion on a variety of different topics. The categories on our website span from culture to economics, the environment, people, territories. And the idea is that those of us expert in a particular field of studies try to share their ideas and their knowledge with the others. Another very important pillar for us is the opportunity for the widest amount of people to read and be able to exploit our contents. Therefore, all the articles we publish are in multiple languages. And okay, so without any further ado, let me introduce our guest of tonight. I'm particularly happy of this live because I've been knowing our guest since university. We studied together during the bachelor at university, Ca' Foscari University in Venice, and then she went on getting her double degree at Georgia State University in the US. And then got a master degree from Sciences Po in Paris. And at the moment, she works at the European Policy Center, a very well-known Brussels-based think tank. And she is a policy analyst whose main areas of expertise include economic and regional policy and the EU recovery package. So welcome very much, Marta. Thank you very much for being here with us tonight.
Hi, Giovanni. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me and for the introduction. I'm really happy to join you tonight.
Thank you. We are very happy to have you. So I decided to invite Marta tonight after reading a recent discussion paper titled National Recovery and Resilience Plans, Empowering the Green and Digital Transitions. So I found the paper particularly insightful, and I have a list of questions I want to discuss with you, but let me start with a general one. So can you tell us a bit more about this paper?
Thank you, sure. And thanks for mentioning this paper. So just, I don't want to speak too long. So just briefly on the paper. This is a work that has been looking at the draft recovery and resilience plans, which have been submitted by member states to the Commission to decide how they will implement the investments and reforms that are to be financed by the Commission's facility for this. And in particular, the paper looked at how the green and digital dimensions are included. We looked into the secondary effects of these transitions, notably on economic and social and territorial cohesion. So just briefly on the findings, clearly, first we find that any structural change, like including the green digital transition, can have a disproportionate effect on vulnerable actors. This is true from a social perspective, so it's true for disadvantaged groups, but it's also true from a geographical perspective, so disadvantaged regions and areas. And it's also true from an economic perspective with, for example, low-income groups and the unskilled workforce. So clearly one of our findings were that it's important the recovery plans take into account potentially secondary effects and put forward a comprehensive, well-thought, well-developed strategy that takes into account also the most vulnerable actors. And we find that, in our analysis, we find that this is done relatively well. So the details, well, there is a good amount of details, but we also find that the impact assessment, for example, or the interlinkages among measures could be better developed and done further, especially on social and territorial cohesion. But at the same time, like I said, this is relatively well done on paper, and now we shall see what comes out of implementation, which of course is what really matters for the next few years.
Indeed, yeah. Thank you very much. I think this is the aspect I found the most interesting about the paper. You don't focus only on winners and losers, but it's really something to put our attention towards too, because there is a lot of emphasis, and I think rightly so, a lot of enthusiasm about this transition towards a greener and more digital economy. However, we don't want to replicate the mistakes of the past, and we want to make it as inclusive and sustainable as possible. So you mentioned already the main categories of people at risk, but passing from an abstract definition to a more tangible one, could you give us some examples of people in these three broad categories that you mentioned before?
Sure, and let me also pick up on something you said, because of course recognizes that there are some risks does not mean it's not meant to undermine the importance of the transitions. I think we all very well understand that for green transition and digitalization are crucial for prosperity and also for the survival of the planet. So this is not to say that we should not undergo these transitions, but it is to say that understanding and acknowledging and taking into account potential negative effects is crucial, because only in this way the transitions will be truly successful and embraced by the whole economy and society. But when it comes to the examples, I'll just give a few. So from a social perspective, for example, or a labor market perspective, we know that technological change has a stronger impact on low-skilled workers. This has been estimated by the OECD. I can tell you that the OECD estimate says that 1 in 5 of low-income jobs is at risk of automation. So that's quite a big percentage. And this is only 1 in 10 for high-income jobs. So there is an issue that the changes brought by automation and other digital technologies can have a heavier effect on the low income or the low skilled workers. Another example of technological change is the gender dimension. We know that the fastest growing sectors that will be more in demand are more male dominated. And this is because they are the ones that require what we call STEM skills, so social, science, technology, engineering, math skills. And these are skills that because of society, men tend to have more than women. And so there is a risk that by supporting and growing and creating jobs in this kind of sectors, we might exclude women from the benefits that technological change can bring to everyone. From a geographical perspective, I can also provide some examples. For example, there is different elements that can bring a geographical perspective. One is that there might be a geographical concentration of particular issues. For example, concentration of specific industrial sectors, like energy-intensive industries that are concentrated in a specific area. And this means that the effects on the labor market will be more heavily felt in that particular area. There are also areas that might have a lower skill base. And so this means that the training and education efforts are much harder to undergo than areas that have a more diverse skill base. Or there are areas that have less digital infrastructure, for example. And so, for example, might be excluded from some of the benefits that digital adoption can bring. So these are just some instances, but I hope this helps give an idea of what kind of risks we can have when we implement policies that are needed for the twin transitions.
It does. It certainly does. And this brings me to your second policy brief that you have recently published, always with the EPC, which is titled Recovery and Reform in the EU's Most Vulnerable Regions, where you stress the importance of convergence at the EU level. And so you already explained why this is so important. And I totally agree with you. And I think EU member states should aim for a more cohesion, for more cohesion in general, and to get to a common standard of both a social and economic being. But I want to ask you, so one of the main criteria decided by the Commission for allocating the grants and the loans of the Next Generation EU is the inverse of GDP per capita, while another one is unemployment rate. So of course, this had the effect of higher proportion of funds allocated to those countries suffering historic low economic growth and high unemployment. So do you think that this is not targeted enough to foster cohesion at the EU level? And like, would you have preferred a more regional approach?
Well, so first, I would differentiate between national convergence and regional convergence, because we can have national convergence, but also increasing regional disparities at the same time. So clearly, I agree absolutely what you said. The Next Generation EU has the potential of increasing convergence, and this is because, in fact, of the indicators you mentioned. But for example, low growth is not really targeted, right? It's just a coincidence that southern member states have high unemployment and also low growth. But if you think about it, Poland, which is not at all a low growth country, is the fourth country receiving the most funding based on the exact same criteria. The targeting is done in a way, of course, that fits the purpose, right? Because we have Italy, Greece, and Spain that receive a big part of the funding. But at the same time, I think more should be done. This is not to say that the recovery facility should do everything. That's clear. They cannot do everything. But I think in the framework, we could have had, for example, a sort of structure that supports a more regional targeting. This is also because the member states are really free to do what they want, more or less, with the funding. Sure, they have to, the objective of cohesion is part of the facility. But I think there is a real risk that some member states, since the strategy is decided on national level, there is a risk that, for example, the funding will go to more advanced areas, or at least areas that are better able to provide results, because that's what matters at the end, the results, which of course it's understandable, but at the same time, it creates a risk of excluding those that might be less capable of providing results, which is arguably the very places where you should be investing. So I think in general, there could be a better targeting. And when I talk about vulnerable regions, for me, that really means low growth. And so low income and low growth at the same time. So that's where disparities are increasing. An example of this is the Greek regions or southern Italian regions. These are areas that are poorer than the EU average, but that instead of catching up, like we would expect, they are growing basically zero, right? So they are diverging, and that's where we should, I think, concentrate some effort. That doesn't mean that the facility should be fully targeted to these areas, but I think that policy in general should at least pay special attention to this phenomenon.
Yeah, I think in the paper you call for a more active role of DG reform, right? You would like to see more of DG reform working together with governments in the member states. Did I get that right?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, the role of DG reform is very, very new, and it's not exactly clear what specifically they will be doing. But an example of how this could work is, so there is this technical support instrument, which is meant to allow member states to ask for support to the Commission in the design and implementation of their development strategies. Something that could be done is to extend this support mechanism to regional actors, so allow regional actors to be more involved in this mechanism and ask, for example, support themselves without having to go through the national government, which might choose not to necessarily include them. So that's an example to say, okay, well, maybe we can support regions in a special way. And I think something else that it's really important generally is access to data, because at the moment, well, we have data at regional level. That's not the issue, but it's not enough, and it's not frequent enough. It's not detailed enough. So clearly, to understand the economic development issues of some regions, one would really benefit from better data and information.
And that ties up perfectly with my next question. So thank you for the comment. So is the digital revolution. In both your works, you underline the importance of infrastructure in enabling the digital transformation. So this is something, of course, recognized by the Commission and present in most of the national recovery and resilience plans. Do you think that this framework that you just described, so having regions directly communicating with the EU Commission would help a better targeting of the digital infrastructure? Do you think that it has been done enough, or would you call for more and different actions to implement such digital infrastructure?
Well, I think what's really important now that the plans are written, right? So we cannot act on those anymore. It's for the national governments to really sit down with more local authorities and decide how to best target the interventions to each of them. Now the role of the Commission now, it's almost over, in the sense that once the plan is approved, they will only look at monitoring and assessment of progress. So it's really about the member states to work on how to implement the actions on the ground and how to do that for the best. When it comes to digital infrastructure, I think, as you said, this is very present in the plans. It's one of the main expenditure items. I would argue that's, I think, a good step in the right direction. And I also think that these plans will make a difference because, especially in some countries, they provide a huge amount of funding, which would have not been mobilized otherwise. So I think it does make a difference. But I think it's important to remember that when we talk about the digital transition, it's not about just infrastructure, which of course is crucial. And I think the plans do this rather well. So they don't focus only on infrastructure, but digital revolution includes everything related to skills, clearly. So workforce training, education, reforming to implement more digital skills also in schools. There is also a big part of funding that is given to, for example, incentives to businesses and enterprises to adopt technological innovations. which is something that is really important, because we can innovate all we want, and we want, maybe we have the best technologies available, but if then these are not adopted by the large majority of our enterprises, for example, then the benefits are rather scarce. So there needs to be, for example, incentives to companies to adopt digitalization, and this is also something that is part of the strategies. So I would say it's a good mix of infrastructure investment, skill investment, and incentives for digital adoption, which are all crucial and interlinked.
Talking about skills, right? Because you mentioned skills being part of the revolution. I think that's really key if we want to make this twin transition as inclusive as possible. This is true for both digital skills, but also for the skills of those workers that will, of course, be affected by what is actually a revolution. No? This is true for the digital revolution, but also for the green revolution. And so I'm thinking, for example, at the coal miners here in the UK in the 80s, that due to technological change and a shift from coal to other means of energy, were left behind. So what can we do for these workers, both in digital wise and energy wise?
Well, absolutely. That's clearly an issue, and I think that in the past, policymakers have made some mistakes. That's true, and I hope and think that at the same time there is some recognition of that. So I hope and think that at least this time they will maybe not repeat the same mistake. But like you said, this. So the twin transitions really require a structural change, I would say, in virtually every sector, every aspect of our even daily lives over the next decades. There are some jobs that will disappear, full stop. So some jobs will not exist anymore. Like I said before, 1 in 5 of low-income jobs is a risk of automation. So certainly there is a part of this that will not exist anymore. And there are some jobs, much more, I would say, that will fundamentally change. Why? Because they will require the introduction of new processes, whether that's because there is new technology that will be adopted. So instead of doing accounting on paper, you'll have a accounting system, so the job will change fundamentally, or because jobs in some types of industries will change radically. I'm thinking about energy intensive industries, or think about steel production. The way steel production is done today will not be the same as in 10 years when they will have to cut their energy expenditure by 70%. So all the people employed in this kind of jobs will have somehow to adapt. And the risk, which is what has happened, like you said, with the coal miners, is that they will not adapt, right? So if they don't adapt, then we have unemployment issues, because they will lose the job or they will not be able to keep up with the changes. So the solution out of this clearly is skills. Like we said, it's training and retraining and skilling and reskilling. So we're not just talking about education, which is school or university. It's really about the existing workforce, what the state can do about that. So with public retraining schemes, but also what the private sector can do about that. So what every single company can do to make sure that its own employees keep up with the changes, the technological innovations that are being adopted, and are able to use them in their daily jobs. So clearly, I really think that, it's impossible to think that a job we're doing today will remain the same for the next 40 years. I really think that's impossible. So clearly the way out of this is retraining. And I think there are a lot of opportunities because, like we said, new jobs are being created, and these jobs pay well, and, they're sustainable. But the workforce needs to adapt to these changes and different demands.
Absolutely, yeah, I totally agree. It's probably a matter of a jointly effort from everyone, those involved directly, the companies, the government, because this transition, especially the green one, but also the digital one, is proceeding at a really high pace, a really fast pace, and if we want to meet net zero by mid-century, we have to change all the processes, from how we harvest and grow food to how we produce our clothing, to how we build houses, how we move around. So it's going to be a massive transformation, possibly the fastest in human history. And of course, there are going to be enormous challenges that come with it. I think I managed to ask you all the questions I wanted to ask, which is great. While we wait for questions from home, from the public, I invite everyone to go and read the article Marta and I wrote together, the Twin Transition Challenges. It's on the blog, jeuneeurope.com. In there, we make an example from the past with the globalization and the basically the taking off all trade barriers and opening up to trade in developed countries and in developing countries. And then I copy pasted this part of the discussion paper from Marta from the EPC in our article. So I recommend everyone to go read it and let us know what you think, as well as the EPC discussion paper and the other policy brief that we mentioned during the live. And I saw a question popping up before. I don't know if we can have it back. So Francesco asks, do you that policies such as the Italian Industria 4.0 and Agricoltura 4.0 have proven to be effective for the twin transition? I think, there is a missing reckon. I guess, do you reckon that these policies have been effective?
Well, I'm not sure I can comment because I'm not extremely familiar with what the policies entailed in practice. I don't know if you, Giovanni, maybe you're more familiar with Italian policies.
No, I'm afraid I don't know much about it, so I don't want to risk commenting on things I'm not an expert. So I'll pass this one, Francesco. I promise to go and study. If you want to put down a few links, maybe we can
absolutely. That would actually, yes,
check them out.
That would be nice.
Any more questions? If not, I think we managed to stay within the half an hour, and I thank you very much again, Marta, for being here with us tonight. Hope to we have another one. These transitions will affect workers that are not that young anymore and may represent a threat to them. how to deal with this from a political point of view?
Well, I think this is a very good question, and we know that there are age factors also when it comes to the acceptance of the efforts that are needed to, to be successful with the transitions. I mean, I'm not a politician, but I think that, if people are felt that they're being taken care of, then they would, be on board with what we're asking them to do, which is be on board with the transitions. And I think the way out of this is this threaten, right? That the question says. That's what needs to be changed. So it doesn't need to be a threat to older workers if companies and the state are willing to invest in older workers and to train even those that are not 30 anymore, which I think it's a very good investment because, if we're going to be working until we're 65 or 70, maybe in the next few decades, then, training someone who's 50 means that they will be working for 20 years. So, I mean, that's the way I would see it. But again, not a politician. So I'll be happy to leave that for someone else. But I think that the changing the threat, that's what makes the transition successful. And that's why we need to be talking about these issues, because only by talking about these issues, we will find a solution, hopefully.
Indeed, absolutely. Okay, as I was saying, thank you very much. Okay, now questions are pouring in. Let's take this last one, and I'll let you go. So the Next Generation EU provides a big amount of funds to EU countries for the twin transitions, but they have to be used in a very short period of time. Can this be a danger for a positive transition?
This is a good question. And in fact, the short timeline of the facility has somewhat been criticized by some. But I don't think that necessarily is a negative thing, because the idea of Next Generation EU is an investment tool. So it's not about current expenditure that, at some point will stop being financed. It's about making the big capital investments at the beginning, to then have a long-term impact and to then let the national government manage, these kind of instruments in the next decades, so beyond the period of time of the facility. So I think the logic behind it makes some sense. And again, the facility is 6 years, so it's not 2 years, to implement everything. One thing I could agree to is that the time to design the recovery plans was very short. So the member states have had to do this massive task of designing their investment and development strategy for the next possibly 20 years in just a few months.
If I remember correctly, the Greek plan was about 4,000 or 6,000 pages. So
yes,
really,
so
really
these
long.
are exactly like huge efforts, and they should be, because you're asking governments to implement structural reforms, to invest billions and billions on different policy areas. So of course the plans are a massive effort, which was done rather quickly. But again, I think at the end, they did quite a good job, even given the short amount of time. I think the dialogue with the Commission was intensive, and the national governments have been really making a huge effort to put something on paper, which, like I said, is quite satisfactory from on paper point of view. And now we shall see what the implementation will look like.
And on this positive note, I say we can draw the live to a conclusion. And thank you very much again, Marta. And for everyone following, we hope to have another live soon. So stay posted. And thank you very much for following.
Thanks
Bye.
to you, Giovanni, for having me, and thanks to everyone who's been watching. Bye. See you soon.
See you. Bye.